Hi everyone, I'm Jarrett Shedd. I play guitar and I teach guitar occasionally. And I'm here to talk a little bit about the guitar course that I created for the company LearnSys.com. It's called Intro to Guitar, and you can find it on what I just said, which is LearnSys.com. And it's called Intro to Guitar. And my face will be on it. Anyway, so I've created some short videos to kind of preview some of the material that can be found on that course, which you have to pay for, but over here on YouTube, which you don't have to pay for. Yay for me. So I'm trying to do some short and to the point videos that correspond to the lessons that I created over on LearnSys.com to kind of support that and advertise for it, etc. So one of the first lessons on that entire course is called All About Guitars, where I introduce and explain just basic background material about what is a guitar. Well, maybe not that far back, but give you some basic information about guitars. So I'm going to split that up into two different videos to make it even shorter and more to the point. So this is just going to be all about acoustic guitars. Henceforth. Let's begin. So that's what this is going to be, all about acoustic guitars. Okay, so we're going to talk today about the two main categories of acoustic guitars and then subcategories therein. So let's get started. What is this thing, which happens to be in my lap right now? This is what's called a steel string acoustic guitar, and that is the first main category of acoustic instrument. And I'm going to go ahead and say that this is probably the most common both in the knowledge of the general public and also most used. So this is a steel string flat top acoustic guitar. And furthermore, this is a fairly reasonably priced instrument, good for students or for someone like me who works with children and doesn't want to have a very expensive instrument banged on by 8-year-olds. So this is a Paul Reed Smith SE edition. It's fairly affordable, especially if you get it used, but it looks really nice. So where do I start? So the strings are steel, or at least the unwound ones are. Some of the strings are wound. That means they have a core wire and then it has wraps around it, windings around it. And those may not be made out of steel. They may be made of something else, but I'll get to that in another video that is just about guitar strings. So let's not get into the weeds there. It is a flat top instrument. So you can see here, the top and the back are flat. This is commonly used in, well, all kinds of styles of music, but country music, pop music, folk music, you name it. There's another style of acoustic steel string guitar called an arch top guitar. And if you looked at it sideways like this, the top would be curved or arched, hence the name arch top. So if you're not familiar with that, an example of some other arch top instruments would be the mandolin, for example, or the violin, or the viola, or the cello, or the double bass, upright bass instrument. Okay, all of those instruments have a carved arch top and usually a corresponding arched back. So if I showed you an arched top guitar like this, the top would have curve to it and the back would have some curve to it as well, because we're all about that bass over here. No treble. So anyway, an arch top guitar is typically used in jazz music a lot, but some more adventurous folks might use it in bluegrass music or folk or something like that, or country or pop, even though flat top acoustic guitars like this are more commonly used and heard in those styles. Maybe I can talk a little bit about tonal differences. So a flat top acoustic guitar like this, typically, there are exceptions, but typically will have longer sustain, might have less mid-range, might have more airy, bright, high frequencies. And an arch top guitar, if you've ever heard of a mandolin before, or if you've ever heard pizzicato, that's when a string player like violin, viola, cello plucks the strings with their fingers. If you've ever heard that, combine that with what you have in your head for a typical acoustic guitar like this, and that's what an archtop guitar sounds like. The attack is going to be very percussive. The attack might even be brighter at first, but then the trail of the note is going to be shorter because there's less sustain, and it might be more mellow. It has a very plucky sound. That's what an archtop is like. It's great for jazz rhythm playing. It's great for lead playing if it's also like amplified or you have some other maybe artificial means to increase the sustain. Or if you just play a lot of notes, then the sustain doesn't matter. You can just fill up the space with a bunch of 8th notes or 16th notes. Okay, I don't want to take too much time. Something to notice, there's a little adjustment here. Steel string instruments, acoustic and electric, typically have something that is called a truss rod inside of the neck. This gives the neck greater strength, which supports it against the tension of the strings, and it also allows you to adjust the curvature of the neck, which might change due to temperature and humidity changes throughout the year. Okay, depending on the climate that you live in, that may be more or less necessary. But typically, most steel string instruments have this sort of support, and it typically gives you some way to adjust it as well. I also should mention there's different sizes. This is a parlor guitar, which is a small body. There's other types like concert, grand concert, dreadnought, jumbo, auditorium, etc. There could be different names based on the brand, but basically smaller body has a faster response, maybe a brighter sound. A larger body has a slower response, so you might have to play harder to get it to really speak acoustically, and might have a darker sound, but again, those are just general expectations. Okay, I don't want to, I could go into woods and that sort of thing, but I don't want to get too distracted. I will just say that people have opinions about woods. Typically the species of the wood. They might think one is brighter, one is darker. Also wood weight, density, and porosity, I guess is how you would say it, the porousness of the wood. That all kind of plays a factor, and some of it is scientific and some of it's not. Some of it's just player opinion. So again, I don't want to get too far into that, at least not right now. Maybe later. So that moves us on. That was the main category of a steel string instrument, and the subcategories of flat top and arch top. And now we're going to get to the other main category of acoustic instruments, which is nylon stringed guitars. Okay, and this is one example. Say hello. This is one example. So nylon stringed because they're made out of nylon or synthetic materials. Again, I can talk more about strings in some other video. But typically nylon stringed instruments used to, way back in the olden times, used to have strings that were made out of organic materials such as animal intestine. So, it's very nice that we don't have to deal with that, because these nylon strings will most likely be more durable and hold their tune better and all kinds of good stuff. And again, typically, these top strings will be pure nylon, and then these other ones, these lower sounding strings, will have wraps around them. So they're going to be nylon and metal together. Again, I can talk more about strings later. So anyway, nylon string, main category. Subcategory, this is a classical guitar, a classical instrument. And that tells you, when a guitar is labeled as a classical guitar, it tells you a few things. It tells you what style of music it's primarily meant for, which is all of the great classical music repertoire, but it also tells you some things that you should expect in its construction, okay? So it's a specific style of instrument. So the first thing that's going to stand out, at least to me, is that a classical guitar has a very wide neck, and it starts off right here at what is called the nut, where the strings pass over. That it has a very wide nut width, and that is for a few different reasons. For one reason, nylon strings have less tension than steel strings, which is another thing. These necks typically do not have a truss rod in them because they don't need it. But that also means that you give up the ability to adjust the neck unless you actually get out like a wood planer and start grinding away. Anyway, so back to the width. Nylon strings, because they operate under less tension, they vibrate in a wider arc, which is actually circular, Therefore, the width of the neck gives the strings more space to vibrate without buzzing into each other. And then from a playability standpoint, that width also gives your fingers more room for the greater independence of your left-hand fingering that classical repertoire requires. Okay? So there's a few different reasons. Also, technique-wise, classical players usually keep their thumb behind the neck at, most of the time. I won't just directly say all the time, but most of the time. That's classical technique. Modern players, rock players, bluegrass, jazz, you name it, a lot of times they'll put their thumb around the neck. So modern guitars often have a narrow neck and narrow nut. Also, the fretboard is very, very flat, sometimes completely flat. Modern steel string guitars, they have a radius. The fretboard is curved, which makes it easier, much easier, I might add, to do certain kinds of chords, like bar chords, where you have to press your entire finger down. Your fingers have a natural curve to them, so when the fretboard is completely flat, it makes things like that very difficult. But it makes perhaps wide stretches, it makes certain things easier. I think the flat fretboard is also just a tradition choice. Traditionally that's how they were made. Okay, so that's enough about the neck. What about the headstocks? Are typically slotted like this, but they don't have to be. They are not typically outfitted with googly eyes. I just added that to be entertaining to some of my younger students, as well as I added these stickers to number the frets. Typically, classical guitars do not have any fret indicators whatsoever, including side dots of any kind. Okay, what else? Classical guitar. Classical guitars are usually deep like this, as opposed to other nylon string instruments. They want a specific sonority, a very beautiful dark tone, or at least a tone that enables the guitar player to vary the tone as they choose depending on where they play on the string. Okay, so these are nylon strings. They're wrapped here at the slotted headstock. They're attached here at the bridge, and they're just kind of tied on, whereas modern steel string guitars usually have bridge pins which hold the string in place. That's probably enough about the classical instrument itself for now. I'm going to compare it to another nylon string instrument style, which is called a flamenco guitar. They might look exactly the same, and sometimes they might not, but I'm going to note some differences. So this is a classical instrument. It has a cedar top, which it doesn't always have to be. Could be cedar, could be spruce. Cedar is thought of typically as darker. Spruce is thought of typically as brighter. Classical guitars can have both, but cedar, I would say it's more common, or at least more common on a classical instrument. Back and sides, they could be rosewood, they could be a whole bunch of other stuff, but it's not as important as the top. Again, in classical guitars, looking for resonance, sustain, and a mellow tone. A flamenco guitar, now a flamenco guitar is typically all about response. So the guitar might be lighter weight due to the woods in it, but also due to the construction of it itself. It might have thinner woods used. It might have less bracing. On the inside of the guitar, there are wood pieces that cross in certain areas to give support. There might be less of that in a flamenco guitar. The action, which is another word for the string height, might be lower in a flamenco guitar. The neck might be straighter. The string, they might use a lighter strings, but that's also player preference. So all of these things contribute so that a flamenco guitar responds more quickly to the touch of the guitarist. Okay, that's due to technique. They might do some tapping with their fingers, which they want the guitar to respond very quickly to that. And they also do a lot of strumming where they basically strike the guitar strings with all of their fingernails together, and they want that to come out very strong and bright. So a flamenco guitar might have a spruce top more commonly than a classical guitar would, though I think flamenco also uses flamenco and spruce depending on preference. They also might be thinner to have less of an air column inside of the body cavity, basically. What else? And a flamenco guitar, again, not always, but might be more likely to implement modern design choices, such as a cutaway, which gives access to the upper frets, such as electronics, which allow you to amplify the instrument, etc. Okay, and so then there's another type, which I don't really know a name for, but you could just call it a hybrid. There is a type of nylon stringed instrument which some people are manufacturing these days, which is basically, it's a hybrid because it uses nylon strings, because some people like that sound, but they don't like the feel of a classical or flamenco instrument. So it's, in ergonomically speaking, it's designed much more like a modern steel string instrument. It has a radius, it has a narrow neck, especially a narrow nut, but it has nylon strings. So you can find some of those out there, and if you want, if you just want or you like the sound of an instrument like this, but you want to play more comfortably, you might choose something like that. Especially great for like folk music, etc. Okay, anything else I didn't mention? I do think I forgot a couple of things. I forgot that, you know, on a, oh no, that wasn't that bad. On a steel string instrument like this, you can also have a cutaway here, for example, to access the frets better. On an instrument like this, you have a sound hole, which is typically round. On classical guitars, you usually have that as well. On an archtop guitar, you usually have F holes because they look like Fs cut into the sides. And that's where, that's not exactly where the sound comes out of. The entire body resonates and vibrates sympathetically the air in the room. So the sound comes from everywhere, but this just allows the air to, not necessarily the air, but the vibrations in the air to escape, push back and forth through the hole and not just be trapped in the guitar. So it does contribute to volume, but it's not like a river of air flowing out of this. It's sound waves. That means it's a pulse, so it's more complicated than you might imagine. Okay, I think I've talked enough, probably even more than I wanted to, but that's probably enough for a video that's supposed to be all about acoustic guitars. And I'm Jarrett Shedd. Thanks for sticking around. See you next time. Bye.